to the Opinion Show. Today we're talking about second chances, maybe a good topic going into the holidays, how as we're considering our end-of-year gifts, our holiday gifts, are there some other ways that individuals can be mentors to people to help bring those who have the misfortune to live in traumatic neighborhoods out of that spiral of violence and into a different trajectory. Bries on Sunday had a large piece in the Plain Dealer about this. That's going to be one of a continuing series about second chances, essentially. What are the ingredients for that? In this case, she looked at the story of David-Avery. And we're going to be talking about that and about the bigger issues. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the editorial board for the Northeast Ohio Media Group and the Plain Dealer. I'm joined today by other members of the editorial board, Kevin O'Brien, the deputy editorial page editor and columnist for the Plain Dealer, and editorial writers Christopher Evans, Sharon Broussard, and Peter Krause. I'm going to ask Sharon to give us a rundown of this, and I will ask you all, as you're listening to this, and maybe you read the story, to share with us your thoughts in the comments when this is posted. Sharon?
I thought Brie had an excellent story this Sunday about David-Avery. He's a kid who recently graduated from Glenville High School. And he's had he's lived in poverty most of his life, it seems, and had very traumatic experience when his sister was killed with the gun that he and his brother had brought into the house for protection. And the story talks a great deal about how he's been kind of lifted out of the spiral, we hope. He's on his way to Dayton job-corp program. By three mentors, a woman who used to live on his street and had kind of impromptu Bible sessions and meals for the kids, a school security guard who kind of took him under his wing, and a caseworker, Eileen Zata, Z-A-T-T-A, who was with the Cuyahoga County's witness program for youngsters, kind of helps kids who have witnessed violence overcome that. And how over the last, it seems like, 8 years or so, they've been firmly in his corner, doing everything from making sure he behaves at school to helping him get into the Job Corp program, talking to his mother, and just kind of always being there at the family's side to kind of pull him out of the tailspin that he's been in, for many, many years, and seem at this point to be having some success. So it was a pretty, heartwarming story, but I think it also told about kind of the grueling journey and how they did not give up on this kid, even though, you could see at times where, it was just very daunting work. So
it does seem that he made a personal decision to change course after the traumatic event of the shooting death of his younger sister, whereas his older brother, with whom he is extremely close, was in jail at the time, on a probation violation at the time the story ran. So clearly he made a different decision or had a different trajectory, or maybe didn't have the same support network.
I think, what I like about Bries Wedding, she's a terrific writer, and she'd written an essay, I'm thinking this is a couple of years ago, on migraines. She suffers from migraines. But her attention to detail and putting together a compelling narrative really stood out to me in this story. And what was interesting was, in the wake of their younger sister's death, was that the older brother took it upon himself to accept responsibility for this, and went to juvenile court, and he pled guilty. It was like negligent homicide or something, so that the family didn't have to testify or relive the trauma. And with David, he felt an equal amount of guilt, because he is the one who got into a fight that led to threats, which is why they had the gun. And so David was going through this period of terrific anger, and at the same time it seemed like the family was very transient, it was moving. But at the time they lived on a street, and there was an amazing character, a woman who was living not a very healthy life, who had sort of come to Jesus moment and decided to start dedicating her life to God. I mean, just like a storefront preacher, but not even quite that organized. And she started holding these Bible sessions in her house and really kind of adopted the Avery children, got them in there, and she would do Bible stuff. They'd watch TV. She would make them dinner or food, and she would take them to church. And at first, David was kind of rebelled against this quite naturally, because it was really the antithesis to the life that he had been living. But slowly she changed his life, and he found this sort of spiritual anchor. And then, like Sharon was saying, he got involved with the security guard, took him under his wing, and it's just really an amazing story of survival.
Yet again, this neighbor had a number of children. We had a picture of her and of the children that she would often host and take to church.
Yeah.
And, but not all of them, you know, have kind of pulled themselves out. You know, again, David's older brother being a good example of that, and of course one of the other children in that picture, sadly, is Andrea, his younger sister, who died. You know, Kevin, I know that you have strong feelings that families really need to step up to help their kids find their footing. But in a case like David's, where, you know, it's clear that he has a very dysfunctional family, that he doesn't have, there's not stability, that they moved a lot, that his father actually, I guess, engaged in domestic, you know, violence, according to the story. They lived occasionally with their grandmother. Perhaps his mother is overwhelmed. It does seem important to have these, you know, mentors that he had, and yet he made a personal decision. How do you think about, you know, maybe the lessons here, or what it says to the rest of us about the best way to proceed to help people find their own footing and find a future for themselves?
Well, I think there are two main points that play into this that you can't really escape. One is that you can't turn somebody who doesn't want to be turned. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And really, you can't stop somebody who's determined to get his life straightened out. And those people like that will find somebody, or they will allow themselves to be found. And, you know, they will work it out the best way they can. And, you know, there are stories like this abound. Unfortunately, I think there are more stories of the other type, where the formation of character that happens when a child is young sticks with them, and they end up, you know, sort of going down the tubes because that's all they see.
Though maybe he was extraordinarily lucky too to have
Right.
three
Clearly.
people step
People coming
forward,
to his life,
and
yeah.
not every kid who is in adverse circumstances who wants to and is open to maybe would be that lucky.
Right.
Pete, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I do think, I don't know a lot about David's parents, but I do think that there was something inside this young man that allowed himself to get help. You know, he may have grown up in a dysfunctional family, but the mom and the dad, for all their problems, something sunk in that made this kid, gave them the capacity to make the right decision when he was being pulled in the wrong direction. And that just goes to show you, I think that there's thousands of kids that are like that are on the precipice. And it's why we do need mentors. We need the big brothers, big sisters, and we can't think of it as just a problem in certain neighborhoods. It's the whole community at large. The suburbs where you don't see a lot of this going on, well, those folks could just as easily get involved in issues in less well-to-do suburbs. I just think, you know, I wish this kid all the luck in the world if he could, but you're right. I mean, there's so many other instances where a kid, a young boy, a young girl is not getting the help, and it's just, you know, all the resources that we spend on so many things in this world that are, to me, are so trivial, and in the meantime, our most important resource is just getting kicked to the curb so often.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of my big takeaways from Bries' story was, you know, the story of David isn't over. We don't know how that story is going to end. I mean, he is setting off on a journey, and it'll be interesting, and hopefully Bries will follow him, because he's still got a long way to go. But this idea of, especially at this time of year where we focus so much on material things, this idea of people in the community, people that you would not expect to step forward, actually stepping forward and embracing, you know, a family at risk, people at risk, and helping them on their way, you know?
That is actually the thing that got me, was the incredible giving of themselves of the 3 mentors who were described, which I have to assume is not probably the case for most, you know, say, publicly funded trauma workers, that they would make such an incredible effort to assist an individual who, you know, and they came together because of the trauma of his sister's death, but also he was traumatized by, you know, the domestic violence earlier. The school security guard who, you know, knew that he was embarrassing the poor kid by, you know, plucking him out of fights and delivering him home to mom, but, you know, he went that extra mile.
Right.
And then this neighbor who, you know, through her own, you know, epiphany or whatever, decided not just to introduce all these young children to you know, God, but also to feed them, to bring them into a safe place, maybe when their own mother wasn't home. And we can't forget that this kind of street culture of gangs and violence and easily obtained weapons, and equally the Glenville area where they live being at the center of the foreclosure crisis, so a lot of vacant homes, that all of that is kind of driving the kids in a different direction.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I thought it said a lot about, you know, just, I think oftentimes we look for quick fixes and, you know, kind of think like, oh, in a year or two, program, you know, some kind of program for a kid, and that's all he needs. Whereas I think this said a lot about being there for the long haul and at every turn and twist, and just kind of hanging in there, which might maybe make us think about programs and about what it really takes to run a successful program, and, and how, you know, you just have got to, you know, have that program there helping someone who needs the help for much longer time than I think that many policymakers, you know, are thinking about these days.
Sharon, you're an expert on the Cleveland schools. One of the interesting things about this story is that David was one of only 2 children in his family to complete high school.
Yeah.
And I think that also says something about the importance of having programs that support kids through high school, so they're not pulled into the street culture, the gang culture, that lands him in jail like his older brother.
Yeah, but I thought it also said a lot about how that had to begin much earlier, because actually I think when all that stuff happened to David, he was 10, so it was before he got to high school, and I'm not sure how successful it would have been, you know, unfortunately, if the incident had happened later in life when maybe he was more pulled in that direction. So I think it says a lot about, you know, some kind of early interventions, maybe, you know, long before, you know, a poor sibling is murdered or something along those lines, and I don't quite know what that means, because this was pretty intrusive, you could think of it. You know, for a parent, it turns out the mother welcomed it and got to know the people and liked them a lot, but you could see some families being very resistant to, you know, someone whisking their kid off, you know, in hopes of a better life.
But I also
there has
think
to be a balance there, I guess.
The other part of the story that was very strong was, I think, Lynn Shea was the photographer. I thought the photos were just beautiful. The interaction between the mother and David just before he leaves. The picture with the social worker checking his schedule to make sure he had enough time to make his connection in Columbus to Dayton. You know, just these moments that we kind of take for granted. I mean, here's a kid, he's going to Dayton. You know, it's like us going to the moon. I mean, it's like he's never been out of this neighborhood, and it's like, get to the station on time, make sure you can make the connection, and all these people just standing by him, you know, helping
all along the way.
But it was also striking, of course, that the family welcomed reporter and photographer into their lives and let such a detailed story be written about the personal innards of their family. Not every family would agree to that.
No, but I think maybe based on the circumstances and how things seem to be working out so far, they may have thought they would get the sympathetic treatment that basically they got. You know, that a good thing is happening here despite some people and because of some other people.
It's also interesting, while David did grow up in a dysfunctional family and the father did leave, I think, at 8 or 9 years old, it says in here the father did remain close with the children. So it wasn't like this father abandoned his kids emotionally. And you know, I think it goes without saying, you know, fathers and mothers, you know, or kids need both.
Well, I think people should read this. I mean, to me, this is a great Christmas story.
Well, on that note, we want to thank you for joining us. This is the Opinion Show, and we'll be back after the holidays. We won't have a show next week. We might have a reprise. And have a happy Thanksgiving and treasure your family. Thank you.